Sounds good. All right, let's get it started. As Brian just said, this is intro to sequencer. So let's jump straight into it. And what are we going to look at today in our training outline? We're going to do a little bit of a recap on virtual production and what it means to do so in Unreal Engine 5. We are going to look at our boy sequencer user interface, some tools and features, because sequencer will be featured on almost every single one of our classes on this fellowship. We are going to talk about how to work with level sequences. We brushed a little bit over that in this morning's class, but we're going to delve a little deeper, hopefully answering a little some more questions, creating and adding these level sequences. We're going to touch slightly on Cine cameras and how to use them, how to make them work in our sequences. And to that end, we're going to do a hands-on at the end of the class today with a multi-camera demo, which will then be on my Friday class, Enhance, to a different workflow. But Cine cameras have their own class, so we're going to brush over them, use them on our multi-camera demo, but then you will have a class with our dear old Erica, and she will go through everything you need to know about cameras and how to enhance your workflow with them. So, virtual production, and what is virtual production? Physical digital worlds meet, and that's what we do here in Unreal. And essentially, this lets us, as directors, cinematographers, visual effects specialists, interact with both sides of this coin. We interact with the real physical world, and then we have the ability to play with Unreal. We do the real and we do the unreal, right? The real-time capabilities that Unreal offers us lets us do a very good mesh and synergy, lets us enhance our synergy between what we're looking at in our physical world and what we have as a background. It also enhances the way the actors feel within this volume rather than going through a green screen, even though we could use also Unreal on a green screen. This is more aiming towards the LED, as you can see here in the image, and essentially lets us have a more personalized interaction with it, since we can pretty much interact with everything that's happening, the physical and the non-physical, right? The digital world behind our actors, behind our props, etc., etc. So what does it mean in Unreal? Well, we have smarter recording and playback tools. We have Sequencer, which is the main guy here, besides our characters, the main guy here in this animation fellowship. We have VCAM, which is the ability to track our cameras and use cameras on from the physical world to represent the camera in Unreal and have it tracked. We have Take Recorder, which lets us record actors connected via LiveLink, for example, mocap or LiveLink facial. And LiveLink is the next one. Yep, the same thing. Lets us do, in this case, particularly face capture or mocap. Take Recorder also helps us recording characters that we are controlling in Unreal, meaning we can walk around with the character and then we are recording him in or them in Take Recorder, and then we can use that animation. Remote API, which is the ability to join in from several, for example, iPads and walk around or do some scouting, some VR or even a VR headset or some scouting with our iPads, lets directors get into the actual level. So that lets us have quite literally direct interaction with it, right? And given the power and the ability to the director to say, hey, this rock, move it a little bit to the left, and have him do it or them do it, rather than having to maybe try and contact them through an email or trying to understand what's going on. It's so powerful regarding that we can even let them have hands on, right? And then we have mocap and ARKit face tracking, same thing we've been talking about. Real-time editing and scouting, again, like I just said, multiple users can manipulate the scene in real time. We just were talking about that. VR-based scouting to examine our virtual worlds. And it is our one-stop solution, because we could, if we wanted to, record, edit, and post-produce while inside Unreal Engine, everything inside Unreal Engine. So let's keep going here through the slides. This is a little bit of the examples I was just mentioning on a more visual perspective. So we have Xsens, which is one of the more known mocap suits. We have LiveLink up here for the face tracking and face recording. Take Recorder, which will take all this information from LiveLink and from Xsens suits or many other company suits. Then we do have our remote API to control our cameras and set our shots through an iPad, which is super useful and great for cinematographers and directors. And then everything gets together and gets inside our main hero here, which is sequencer. So we'll keep going a little bit, and we'll go into the main thing today, which is sequencer UI tools and features. So what is sequencer? Well, sequencer is Unreal's answer to nonlinear editing and assembly, because it's not only run the animations, it is also our editing tool. We could use, like I said in our previous slide, we could use Unreal to do the final edit of this. We could use it as in replacement of an external video editing software, because sequencer in and on itself is a video editing software. Obviously, we also have the capabilities of going inside our shots and creating them, ground up shot creation. We could use sequencer as a previous tool is used a lot, and the fact that Unreal looks so good from the ground up makes it so interesting and so attractive for people to use it as a previous tool. And it's so fast, and the iterations are also super fast and organic, right? We could go for a full film creation, or we could go for a game cinematic creation, which has been seen a lot already. So user interface and what's going on here, and we'll jump into the engine in a second. Don't get angry at me. We'll stop with the slides on this one, and we'll jump into the engine, and we'll talk a little bit about sequencer in engine. So we'll go one by one on our numbers, and we'll jump back and forth from the engine. So user interface, the very first thing we need to talk about here in Unreal on the sequencer will be our toolbar, which is essentially all those little icons that we have here at the top. Now, we won't cover all of them because there are a lot of them, and they will also be covered by several classes. So we'll jump now in the engine, and we'll open our first sequencer. There are several ways of creating a sequencer. The one I want you guys to use right now, and the easiest one, we will create a cinematics folder. So we have it here in our content, and we'll create a cinematics folder. If you have this project, which you should have, there's already a ton of them in here. You can open one of them if you want, or you can simply right-click anywhere here on our empty, go to cinematics, and create a level sequence. In this case, we will always call your level sequencers or level sequences with an ls, and we'll go ls_class. So we'll take a look at our toolbar right here. So this is what we get when we open sequencer for the first time. We obviously get our timeline. We get our tracks stack, which will be populated in a second here. And what we were looking at is our toolbar up here. And like I said, we're not going to look at all of them specifically, but we'll brush over all of them, okay? So this one right here, the very first button, is telling us what actors are we selecting here for the populated, what actors are active, the level that's active right now, right? So in this case, it will be Egypt demo. This sequence will bind to play in editor and will bind to simulate. This is all more for programming or gaming methods. We don't really need to worry too much about that. So next button, we have the save. This button will save this sequence. As you can see, the little asterisk is now gone. And this will only save this sequence, okay? It will not save any nested. It will not save anything else on the level. It will simply save this sequence. This button is great. This great will find our sequencer in our cinematics or wherever it is in our content browser. So it's a quick way of going into our, where is the level sequence located. Then we have this button, which will create a lot of conflict. So we are not going to touch that button right now. We're going to do it later today. And then we have our rendering capabilities. In this case, if we open the three dots, for now, there's still movie scene capture. We will rather use movie render queue, which will be explained in the following classes. And if we click on it, it will open up movie render queue, and we'll get the capabilities of rendering, and we'll export out of sequencer. Opening the director blueprint for this sequence. This is a little bit more advanced, and we will not go through it today, but for those that are curious about it, this is essentially a blueprint for sequencer. It's something that you can apply logic to run in your sequences, okay? Then we have this one that has a ton of, this is the action, I believe it's called actions. Yes, it is. Has a ton of capabilities. These are all things that we can do by right-clicking or doing some things here in our timeline. But we also have all these that are already spread out a little bit here in our buttons. We do have import, export. We have save as. We have the transform trims, etc. This is great, but it's it's essentially summarizing a lot of things that we can do already by right-clicking or using shortcuts here in our timeline. Then we have visibilities. Now, this one is more for you to play around with, but it's pretty much what you see is what you get. Is we're going to get a range slider, we're going to get layer bars, keys, etc., etc. And we're going to try and turn on and off this as we see fit. Obviously, this is very customizable, and you will use it for your own project and the way you wanted to use it. By default, this is pretty self-explanatory and works pretty well. And then this one is the one I do want you to start clicking on, the playback options, because there are a couple of things here in the playback options that you really want to set on at the beginning, on the very first time you start using Unreal, which is, for example, well, first and foremost, we do have our start, our end, our playback speed, ranges, game views, rerun. This is all by default. It's okay. This looks at more advanced stuff that we're not going to touch on today. And then we do have the playback range on all sequences. And this is the one I want you all to have turned on from the get-go, which is keep the playhead in the playback range while scrubbing. Because what happens if we do not have it on is this. I can go outside of my playback range, which is something I do not want and probably nobody wants. Because at that point is where you start doing -1 keys instead of 0, etc., etc. So we're going to go here into the playback options, and we're going to enable keep playhead in playback range while scrubbing. And that will stop my playhead from going outside, either left or right at the end line of my sequence here. We're going to keep going down. These are all the keyframes that we're going to be using during this fellowship and will be explained tomorrow in Intro to Animation. So we're not going to go through all of them right now, but some of these will be used in class, and we'll use them later today too. This button here, the auto key button. This is well known in the industry by any other software too. Unreal has it. Now, little caveat with this, sometimes it does not work. So I'm going to do a little experiment here and see how we fare. I am selecting any actor here in sequence in the viewport. We're jumping ahead slightly to do a test here on the auto key so you can see it working or not. And I'm going to right click here on our track stack. And one of the options that Sequencer offers us is actor to sequencer, which is the very first one in the top. Because anything that we want to animate has to be brought into our sequencer. So actor to sequencer, and Unreal is smart enough to have a list of chosen actors. In this case, I have one. So we'll bring this column here. And we said that our auto key is on. I'm going to move down to frame 30, and I'm going to move this slightly. As you can see, auto key was on. It did not work. Sadly, I don't know if this is intentional or not, but what you need to do for auto key to kick off is create our very first keyframe first. Once we created one keyframe, auto key will now proc in and, I don't know, get awakened, be awakened, and now will essentially populate and behave like the auto key should. But if we have no keyframes, it does not necessarily work. So what we want is to create one starting keyframe that we'll create by clicking on this little circle button or by pressing the S key on your keyboard. Once that's done, then we do have auto key capabilities. And since we are here, we're going to leave this guy here. We're going to delete all the keyframes. This one we're going to jump ahead over, and these are the snapping options. So I'm going to create a couple of keyframes here since we do have our auto key on. Simply creating transform keyframes, right? I'm just moving an object through the timeline. I'm moving ahead with the playhead, and I'm creating keyframes because I have my auto key on. So what's happening now is, as you can see, when I move the playhead, you can see that it is effectively snapping to not only the frames, which is normal behavior, but if I go further out, you can see that there is a snapping tendency to the keyframe. And that is because I do have snapping on, which will then turn it off. It will now only snap to some issues, as you can see, and we'll cover them shortly in a second now. but it will obviously jump from one frame to the other, which is normal behavior, but it is no longer snapping to anything. It's no longer snapping to my keys. So these are the snapping options. And this is another thing that I want all of you to have enabled right now and probably never disable ever again in your lives, which is, if I recall correctly, let me confirm that. I think it's, yeah, I nailed it. This one, snap to sections while scrubbing, is for some reason by default disabled. And what happens if I have snap to sections, the opposite, actually. Oh, it wasn't that one. It wasn't that one. Hold. It was interval, right? Yes, it was interval. So we'll leave snap to section as it was. Snap to interval while scrubbing is disabled by default. And what that generates is this, which is called, or what we call in the industry, an interframe. I can put keyframes in here. And even though this might be intentional and useful in some specific cases, this is not useful in most of them. And it's very easy to confuse yourself and not understand what's happening and having some micro jumps on your projects because you have something called an interframe. So what I want all of you to do is snap to interval while scrubbing, have it on, and that will we'll no longer have the ability to create interframes. Okay, and this will save us a lot of time and a lot of headaches. We will also see the little asterisk disappear in our frames because we're no longer jumping interframes. Right next to it, snapping options, play around with them. They're pretty self-explanatory, but the one you really want is snap to the interval while scrubbing turned on. FPS, Unreal is FPS agnostic. Anything you change here will change on the rendering, on the play of this, and it will then change again in the rendering if you change it or if you leave it as native here, right? And then we have the curve editor. So we jumped ahead a little bit because we do have, there we go, we do have the curve editor. So we'll go over the curve editor in the next slide. Something that I'm going to mention and we're going to see later on today is ls_class here is our sequence, the one we're running on right now. We can nest sequences. I'm going to very, very quickly nest a sequence just to show you the breadcrumbs, but we will not panic and we will go over this on Friday. So nobody panics, but I will now nest a sequence. So what I will do is, particularly in this case, create a shots track, and I will add one simple shot. I will add shot 3. So what happens now is that if I go into shot 3, you can now, I want you to avoid looking at everything down here, and I want you to look to the top right of my sequence. You can see now that we have effectively created what it's called, or what we call, like with some a happy name is breadcrumbs, right? Because we are leaving breadcrumbs behind. If I click back on ls class, I'm going to jump back out to my other sequence, and we will call them master sequences again on Friday. If we go in, we are now on this. We are now on ls shot 3 sequence 1, right? If we again click back, we, as you can see, have the back and forth movement that we can go through in our sequences. We can also click on our keys to go back to it and go forward. Okay. Another small thing here, if the sequence is locked with this little lock, it will not let me do anything whatsoever to it. I cannot change anything here because the sequence is locked. Take recorder locks the sequences it records. So do not panic. Everything's red. Nothing is working. It is because Take Recorder locks them down. You will have a class on Take Recorder, but just a good thing to mention right now. We went over breadcrumbs, and now let's go a little bit over what's next here in our sequencer. We do have an outliner, if you will. It is also called an outliner, where we have our tracks add and we have our filter. So let's jump back into Unreal and take a look at this shot that I brought in here, which is great as an example, where we already have several tracks. Anything that we add to our sequence that is the main and the highest hierarchy will be called a track. In this case, this is it will be in and on itself a track, right? This is a camera track, which is not to confuse with a camera cuts track, which is different. This is a skeletal mesh I brought in, which is a track. But then if we start opening them, we see we have more tracks in them. So essentially anything that's going to be living here in our sequence is a track, right? And it is also made very clear by the fact that we can plus track and start adding more tracks on top of the already existing one. Or we can bring in any new tracks from this track button up here at the top. For example, if I wanted a fade track, right, to make a fade from one color to another, in this particular example, I will then bring in the fade track and I will go save to 1, right? So I can create this small fade here, which I have snap to keys enabled. So it is not letting me see the, there we go. Okay. Come on. Are we good there? Might be too close to each other. Yeah, it's still not. Let's turn on the snapping. There we go. And we generate this effect. This will be, I believe this will be covered in, I think in the camera class too. It's very simple though. I just pretty much explained how it works. The fade track, and we go from 0 to 1 and we get the fade. And we also have the capabilities to, in the track itself, right click on it and go to properties and change the color if we wanted to. So this is essentially our outliner here in Sequencer, right? It is what we use to stack anything and to add things that we will want to animate or spawn, right? We'll go over spawning later on. I know it's a sore subject. We also have filters, which are awesome. These we have in our outliner here on the top right, but we also have them here in Sequencer, which means I could, if I have a very long sequencer, I could just filter for the subjects or the actors I'm looking for, right? In this case, I turn on cameras and camera cut tracks are the only things that are going to be showing up, right? Which is great. This is super good to have more control over what's going on and what we have here. What are we looking at? Then we can search. So I could search for money and it's going to bring it up. Same capabilities we have with our outliner pretty much. Recently added, which are super welcomed. We also have our numbers on the frames. Which frame are we working on? I'm going to 300, I'm going to 30, I'm going to 50. This is a way to type or move between frames. And this is going to tell us our in and out, our first frame and our last frame. And then we're going to go straight into the timeline here. And you can see that I'm already moving in the timeline with obviously hotkeys. I'm not pressing any numbers, any buttons here on our sequence UI. So how am I moving? A couple of tips here. They're going to be at the end of the slides, but since we're already working on a sequence, which is what we're going to do through the entire class, I'm going to tell them the ones I'm used to the most and that I have to think or look at my mouse while I'm doing it because they are already so internalized on me that they're automatic. So right click, holding down right click will let me pan through the sequence. Holding down control key and scroll wheel out or in will let me zoom in the sequence. The comma and the dot key will jump between keyframes. Spacebar will play. And I believe that is, let me think. I believe that is all I do mostly, yeah. I'm using my hand movements to try and figure out if there's something else that I keep doing while I work here. And obviously, click and drag, left click and drag. It's gonna let you work on a marquee and select different things. But yeah, that's pretty much what comes to mind here. There's going to be a slide at the end too, with a ton of keyframes that you can play around with here in Sequencer. We're going to get rid of this. We're going to get rid of the fade track and we're going to go back to our slides. So we looked at our playback range controls. We did not. So playback range controls right here at the bottom to extend or compress or move around. I already showed you how to do this with hotkeys. Probably never again you will use this or see it. I don't see anybody using this. I simply go control and scroll wheel and then right click. Same capabilities. And then back here to the left, we do have our play button, our pause. We can jump between frames. And these actually also show you the hotkeys if they do have them, right? We can go to the end, we can go to the beginning. That's another good one. Arrow key up will send us to the beginning. And I believe it's control. Yes, control arrow key up will send us to the end. So arrow key up to the beginning, control arrow key up to the end. And this again will be also shown in the slides at the end. So let's keep going. And we're going to touch lightly on the curves editor because we do have a class that goes deeper on what the curve editor is and how to use it. But just know that it works with obviously our level editor, which is what we're using and what we have here in the background: cinematic assets, blueprints, Niagara, and Contra-Rig. Essentially, this is what you will have in Maya or in Blender or any other software that does animation. We do already have here. We do already have it here. Also have it, not already. Also have it here in Unreal. So we open it by clicking this little icon here at the end. And as of right now, we do not have any curves to do editing because we do not have any keyframes. So what I'm going to do is create a couple of keyframes. We're going to click on this little camera icon. We created a camera cuts track by adding a track and went to camera cuts track. This will be shown later today, so don't worry about it. But I'm going to create I'm going to lock the view to this camera. And I'm going to create a couple of keyframes so we can see what the curve editor does real quick. And then it will be explained, don't worry about it, deeper into another class. So I'm just simply going to pilot the camera here by going into it, clicking here on the top. This is camera shot 3. And I'm going to unlock, and then there we go, pilot the camera, there we go. And now I'm going to move over here. Since we have our key on, effectively created a key. And if we now go to our curve editor and we click on our camera, we'll see that we do have finally some information. This information, I know it's in the location and rotation. So I'm going to go to the transform. And as you can see, effectively, we do have 2 keyframes, right, on each of our transforms. We're going to graph our y-axis, so we can play around with this y-axis. And from here, essentially, we can also start working with finessing our animation. What we have here in our curve editor, besides all of these that will be explained, no need to panic, is on the top, we have frames. And on the vertical axis, we have values. So we're telling Unreal that in the 0 frame, we will have our y-axis of our location on the camera shot 3 on 1100 y, right? And then we're telling Unreal that once we get to frame 33, our value is 547. Which means that it will have moved from the left to the right, as we can see here. We can change the behavior of this curve, which is essentially the interpolation between point A and point B, by working with curves. I can, for example, make this effect like this, and this will make it so it will go further to the left rather than going directly to the right and then snap to the right. Because we're telling it, hey, in less amount of time, make a very sharp change on your values, right? Different would be if I do this very softly. I'm telling it in a longer amount of time, change your value slightly. So it's going to move from left to right softly, right? It's going to stop a little bit here at the end rather than going on a sharp, very, very sharp angle and stop suddenly, right? So this will be covered in class, which has extensive content on Curve Editor. But just for you to know, a couple of key buttons here in the Curve Editor are the tangents. You see me moving this little line here. This is one of the tangents on this keyframe. As of right now, I am standing on cubic interpolation. I could, if I wanted to, break both tangents. And if I go here and create another keyframe by selecting this and going into my camera, let's create another keyframe right here. We're going to go to the y-axis again. And now set down a keyframe. There we go. I could, if I wanted to, break the tangents to have more control over the curves. As of right now, the tangents are broken. And you can see that I have single control over one of them, rather than being on a Bezier or an automatic or a curve, which will then move them both at the same time. I could also enable weighted tangents, which lets me also expand or retract this to make a softer, smoother approach, or not, or sharper approach, right? And then we have obviously the interpolations, which again will be touched on in Intro to Animation. But essentially, I wanted to show you a couple of them to work already, be able to work at least with the curves and play around with them slightly. Okay, so sequencer, curves editor, and best practices for a single monitor layout. So I'm not going to go into Unreal and show you all of these. I will show you how to play around with your sequence, with your layout, because this is very, very personal. Each one of you will choose how to work. This is one recommendation for single monitor. And then on the next slide, we have single monitor animation, and then we have dual monitor, right? These are recommendations. This is not how everybody does it, right? Because everybody has their own ideas. We could be left-handed or right-handed, so it doesn't really matter. This is just a recommendation. What I will show you, this you can take a look. This mentions, for example, viewport 1 with a split viewport. So already stopping that one, and I'm going to show you how to create that split viewport. So we're going to close sequencer for now. Actually, we're just simply going to move him down a little bit. Move it down a little bit. So we're going to jump out of our camera. We're going to fly around a little bit. And if we go on the, nope, let's go back here. If we go into, I believe we were looking at right here on the viewport options, we have right there at the bottom something that says layouts. And this gives us the ability to switch or change the way my viewport behaves. So in this example, I am switching the viewport to have a split viewport, right? 2 panes. I could switch it to this one. I could switch it to this one. This is, again, your own choice, right? But at this point, I have perspective on this one. And for some reason, I have wireframe. Let's go to lit and let's go to a camera, because this already lets me have one of the capabilities, right? I'm looking through our camera here, and I can then on the viewport on the other side, start flying around and play and modify things, but not being married to our camera view, right? It's letting me control my scene without having to be married to my camera view, which could be constraining at some points. I don't really want to start moving this object. If I wanted to move it on the x-axis, it's very complicated to know how far I'm going here. Whereas if I'm right here, I can do some small modifications and be more precise, right? So real time off in this one. So that's one way of splitting your viewports, right? We're going to jump back into a single viewport. You could do a different thing, which is what we do here in our example for the double monitor. We'll go over later. So default view and cinematic view. I'm going to explain this because this will give you all a lot of headaches, and it has happened before. So let's split our viewport again. Let's go into our sequence here. Let's have our camera locked to sequence. And as you can see, my right viewport jumped into my cinematic. Let's go here and do it again. This one jumped to my cinematic. This one did not. Even if I have it selected. Why is that? Why is that happening? Why are not both jumping into a cinematic? And that is because this option here, allow cinematic control, is not enabled on my left viewport. If I were to enable it, both of them are now behaving the same. If I were to disable it, now this viewport is no longer capable of running cinematics, right? So my locking of camera will only affect any viewport that has enable or allow cinematic control. This drives people crazy because sometimes they create a second viewport, as I will show you in a second, and both of them are running the camera, and that's not the purpose, and that's not what they were looking at, right? So allow cinematic control. Original optional viewport 2, which we'll cover in a second with the dual monitor setup. Dock tabs. This is, again, these two are very, very personal and subjective. Holly, you're my hero. Yeah. So dock tabs and tools, this is very, very personal. This is how you want to split this off the way you want it. This is super subjective. This is a recommendation that we have here, but I'm going to show you how, right? You can grab most of the tabs here and fly them around your scene, and Unreal is even smart enough, if it didn't crash, there we go, to snap to some places, which is absolutely great. We could even stack them together up here. Why would you want to do that? I don't know, but you can. The thing is that you can, right? So this is very, very customizable. So play around with it as much as you want and make sure that it fits your workflow and the way you want to work and makes it more comfortable to you. Because this is, like I said, this is very subjective. So it's not something that I can tell you, hey, this is how you run it, and I have the actual absolute truth. This is very, very for you, for each one of you. So single monitor layout, again, more recommendations, and then dual layouts. For this one, I'm going to explain one more thing, which is we can go here to window, viewports, and we can create another viewport. This is a floating viewport that I can also stack here. And I will create this horrible creation, this horrible monster. But what you want to do with this one, the floating one, is probably send it to another monitor, right? I have my second monitor here to my right. So I would send this one to my right, and then I will have a full blown viewport maybe on the right-hand side, et cetera, right? So again, window, and then there's several ones that you can create a second one. You can create second content browsers. You can create second details panel. You can create more outliners, more viewports, et cetera, right? So again, these are just suggestions. Sequencers, tools, and features on this link here. A super in-depth explanation. I would say we will be touching on them in class throughout the entire fellowship. So wait before you launch onto the documentation, which can be a little bit daunting and a little bit scary, on the scary side. Working with level sequences. We already jumped the gun. I was telling you guys not to jump the gun, and I did myself. So we're gonna slide back a little bit into our slides and talk about what a sequencer structure is on a film versus what we call it here in Sequencer, in Unreal Engine. And this is where most people also go a little bit nuts, because we call them different things, but they are all the same thing. So let's go side by side. On the film side, we have a film, a feature or a short, which is a collection of sequences, the entire thing, the 3-act structure. And on the right side, we call that our film or our master level sequence, a collection of organized nested level sequences, which will then create a narrative film or a short or a cinematic. Then we do have acts in our film, right? Which is the structure, a basic structure, the vision for a film or storytelling, in storytelling. And then we also have them in Unreal, and they are also level sequences. So this drives us back to what Brian said this morning. A level sequence is a level sequence is a level sequence. They are all called the same. They are all mentioned from a different point of view, and the naming would be different, because we would call ones a sequence and some others we will call them scenes or shots or takes. But the actor, the asset in and on itself, is a level sequence. The master is a level sequence, the act one is a level sequence, the sequence is a level sequence, the scene ones that takes the shots, etc., etc. We have here a comparison one-to-one to what is it in a film and what it is in here in Unreal, the translation for a more technical terminology here within the engine, right? But essentially, they are all level sequences. And we have here a comparison for you to read one-to-one. Level sequences, terminology, scene assemblies. So let's go over these a little bit. Assembled environments constructed from DCC or within Unreal. Performance takes, which is the raw data that we're bringing in, animated in Origin here in Unreal, or we're bringing in from a mockup or any imported FBX animation. Master layouts. Now, these ones are the ones where we have graduated takes, where we have our assemblies used to block our character performance, where we have, it's no longer a basic workflow with keys and animating our character. It's already a graduated version of it. We have shots, which is the highest version of those master layouts. And then we do have our master sequences, which contain our shots to represent a portion of our film. We will go over master sequences, how to create them, and how to nest on Friday on advanced workflows. And this is the one I wanted to, I was mentioning this morning, and I'm going to stop here and talk a little bit about this in Engine 2, which is working with levels. Now, persistent level, again, going to be our highest hierarchy. How do we recognize our persistent level here in Unreal? If we go to our levels tab, we know that the persistent is the one that is currently open or double clicked, or if you will, right? Which will be, in this case, if you have this project, or in this case, in this project, is the stylized_Egypt_demo. As you can see here, I do have two other sub-levels. And in this case, both are representing a different lighting setup, slightly different lighting setup. So persistent level, going to be always the one that's open, and we cannot unload the persistent level, right? It will stay there forever. So we cannot unload it. We can turn it off. It's going to turn off everything, but we cannot unload it through our level visibility tracks, which will be explained on Friday, right? So we do have two sub-levels here. Let's keep going. Examples, we talked about this morning. We talked about this morning, where we gave you guys a lot of examples on what would you use on a sub-level and why would you use them. In this case, the example here mentions an environment, a sequencer light setup, a sequencer cinematic, cameras and items specific to a sequencer, characters on another sub-level, blueprints, effects, or post-processing volumes. This is very, very niche and specific. I don't necessarily work through all of these. I have way less than these, actually. But again, at this point, it depends on your project, okay? So in this example here on the image, we do have effects geo. That's one I use a lot, geo for geometry. Foreground looks fine. And then we have lighting, for example, and P for post-process, right? So this is also slightly subjective. What we need to understand when we're working with sub-levels is the deeper we go, the more complicated we're going to make everything for everybody. So make sure that you use this wisely and that you know how much you're splitting off, because sometimes you don't even necessarily need to split off. On the project you're doing here, it's probably going to be either 3 sub-levels or 2, one for the environment, one for the lighting setup, and maybe one for the character, but I would leave the character on the persistent. So there might not even be a need for more than 2 sub-levels. If you're running a ton of effects and you want to have them off while you're working, then maybe an effects sub-level, right? So what actors can we bring into Sequencer? What type of actors we can bring in? So we can bring static meshes, which are literally anything that is static, which means it will not deform. It does not mean that it will not move, because we can 100% move them in Sequencer, but it means that it will not deform. Essentially, it's the distinction between static and skeletal meshes. Skeletal meshes contain a bone or blend shapes and can be deformed, right? Well, skeletal meshes have to contain a skeleton, but they are deformed by other blend shapes or bones. Pawns or characters are usually going to be skeletal meshes, but sometimes they are blueprints. Metahumans, for example, are characters and they are blueprints. Levels, we will bring those in on Friday on level visibility tracks. Control rig, obviously. Volumes, because we could bring our post-processing volume into a sequence and animate it. Blueprints, we can bring in blueprints, either logic and modify their logic in Sequencer, or blueprints that are, for example, yet again, our metahuman. Metahuman is a blueprint. It's also a skeletal mesh, and it contains a skeletal mesh, and it contains what we could name as a character, but it is, in and on its nature, a metahuman. When you drag it into the viewport and it's in the outliner, is a blueprint actor that contains our skeletal mesh, et cetera, right? Niagara system, particles, we can bring in materials. We don't necessarily bring in materials themselves, but we do bring either the skeletal meshes or the static meshes that contain or that have those materials applied to them. And then we can animate and play around with them. And we can also bring in lights, which is a great capability that Unreal has. And we can animate them. We can animate color, size, etc., etc. A lot of capabilities. A little bit more on level sequences used for cinematics. So here you will see an example of a shot-based workflow that we will cover on Friday, but we can nest them, right? We can nest within a film, we will nest sequences, and within those sequences, we can nest shots. And you can here have some suggested naming or that they use in the industry for shots or for takes or for sequences themselves. I tend to usually always name my sequences LS at the beginning to quickly recognize them. And because it also gives me the ability to go in my content browser and quickly type LS, and it will bring me 1,000 million things, other things, but 1,000 million other things. There we go. That's English. But it will bring up top the ones I already called ls underscore something, right? This doesn't mean that I cannot go here into my filters and go to cinematics and find them, et cetera, or have them already here. But I just, for a naming convention and for OCD sakes, I name them ls underscore, and a lot of people do. So, and this comes with the Hellbent possessables and spawnables, and we are 10 minutes out from the hour. So we will take our break right now, and we'll come back to this because I don't want to send this into the previous to the break. I want to do this after the break. So we'll take 10 and we'll come back. Spawnable actors and possessable actors. We'll start from the easy one right now. And we'll see what happens when we reach the non-easy one. So possessable actors, they persist in the world. They are shared by sequencers, and it is the most common workflow. What are possessable actors then? Everything in our world, in our outliner, and everything in our world that does not have a little lightning icon, and that does not have the little lightning icon. That's the easiest way of recognizing one a possessable actor, right? Everything that lives on our sequencer that does not have the spawned track or the lightning, everything that's in the world, everything that will not be destroyed, right? Once we create a spawned version. So essentially everything that's not a spawnable, that's the easiest way of telling it. But how do we recognize the spawnables would be a better question to ask us. And what are they? So they exist only while sequencer is open. They are marked by the lightning symbol in the outliner / sequencer because both of them have it. And they facilitate working with shot-based needs. And that's going to be one of the examples I'm going to give, which is what we talked about earlier today. So how do we make or get a spawnable or a spawned actor? I jumped over one of our icons here because I wanted to go through that button right now as we create this, this new sequence. So I jumped over one of our buttons because I didn't want to generate any panic because I knew it was going to be a spawnable. This is the icon I jumped over. Create a new camera here and set it as the current camera cut. When I click on this, Unreal will automatically do a couple of things for me. It will create a camera cut. It will assign the camera that it created to the camera cut, and it will also create a camera. But lo and behold, it does have this little lightning icon over it. And if I hover my mouse on it, it says this item is spawned by sequencer according to this object's spawn track. So this actor right here has a spawned track, which literally has a on or off switch. I can make it disappear even with sequencer already open. You could do this if you wanted something to disappear throughout your shot. or if you wanted to get rid of something throughout your shot. This works, air quotes, like a visibility track, okay? But I have not used this ever, but I can see possible uses for it, like making something go away, disappear. You could also add a simple visibility track to an object. I wouldn't use this for attaching objects or detaching objects. We'll go over that later on different classes. But this telling me already that this object is spawned by sequencer. We're going to call this cam class 01. And we're going to take a look at this cam in our outliner. We can see that our cam here has indeed and effectively, whether this actor is spawned by sequencer or not, it does have the lightning. It even tells us, hey, it belongs to ls_class. But not to confuse that, because if I send this static mesh here, it will also belong to the sequence. But this object is not spawned by this sequence. Take a look at what happens with our camera when I close sequencer. That camera, cam_class, no longer exists. If I reopen sequencer, cam_class comes back to life. And this is one of the first clues and one of the first things you need to think about when you're working with spawnables. Why and what, very specifically. Because they will live only as long as that specific sequence is open. And what happens if I have a master sequence? Again, we'll cover those on Friday, but we do have a master and we have several nested shots under it. If I move from shot to shot, it will then at that point spawn only what actors are on those shots. So it will despawn the previous one. So we cannot even work with that and say, okay, it was spawned once, then that's it. I'll be fine because it is nested, so it will be alive. No, that's not correct. It will only spawn and run whatever sequence is under the playhead. Okay, so that's the main difference between spawnables and possessables. Spawnables only live in our sequences. The minute we close them, they are gone. Possessables will persist in our world. What and how or why would you use this actually? What are some use cases for spawnables? For example, let's say I have this camera angle here, and we're going to go with LS class, and we're going to possess this camera. And I'm going to go in this camera angle. Let's say I want to go in this camera angle. And let's say in this camera angle, I want another one of these columns closer to my camera and right here. So this is looking good for this. Let's say it's looking good. Looks good for this shot. What happens when I go away? I'm actually breaking my environment here. So this could be one great example of what you could do with spawnables. What I'm going to do is add this actor to the sequencer. And how do we go back and forth? Noah explained this already. Right click on it and convert to spawnable. And now this new SM building column will only appear on this shot. The minute I leave this shot, it goes away. So that lets me modify composition and shots if I need to add objects. This is if I need to add objects, right? Lets me, for example, in this case, use case, lets me add another object to the scene that it will only populate that specific shot and it will not bother any other shot. The same thing happens if I have 25 metahumans, but they are the same. If I have 25 shots with the same metahuman, what's the point of having all 29 of them in my viewport, in my outliner, causing my PC to try and shoot itself, right? I can run them as spawnables. So each one of them will appear on each of the shots. And what's the difference between running them as spawnables and turning them on and off visibility? Well, first and foremost, I don't need to do keyframes on visibility tracks at the beginning, at the end, and at the end of every single one of my shots, for one. For two, I only have one in my outliner, right? Even if they're invisible, they will live in my outliner, so generating clutter. 3 gives me the ability to play around with each of them specifically in my shots without having to worry about any other one popping on my screen if I forgot a keyframe or something like that, right? So those are some examples on why would you use this on characters or why would you use it on environment settings. Another great example is using it on lights. Let's say on this specific shot, I see that in between my columns, it's a little bit too dark. So what I could do is bringing one of these, a point light, and I'm going to play slightly a little bit fast here. So we finish up with this one with the examples. And I'm going to set this to 3. I'm going to set it to a more orangey color so it fits the environment. And now I'm going to check if what I did looks okay for my new point light. So I'm going to go all the way to the bottom, which is here. And yeah, that looks, let's say it looks fine. Let's move it a little further back, a little bit there. And that's it. This is just an example. So what I can do now is add this point light here, and again, convert to a spawnable. That means that this point light will only work on this shot. But once I'm outside of the shot, once the shot is gone, that's it. It's gone. And this is great for lighting characters specifically, because there might be some shots in which we want a slight rim light or a fill light on our characters. Fill would be on this side in my face in the camera. But only on that shot, because if we leave that on, there might be some other points where my character is super lit up from everywhere and it's a whole mess. So that's another great use case, lighting specific areas or even better, characters. So we're going to leave all these here and we're going to jump back into our slides. Shot creation. How do we create shots? 3 different ways. Cinematics button in the main toolbar, add or import animation options, or the content browser, right-click cinematics. We did that already. We went here and right-click cinematics. That's one. The add level sequence here will create also another sequencer. And I believe it said add import in our content browser, which is right here. Again, cinematics, same thing. So these are 3 ways. I usually tend to use right-click here. Another cool thing, if you didn't know, they added this recently and it's awesome. These menus, we can type on them. It's insane. There's nowhere to type. So there's no search bar here. You just type, which is a little bit weird, but it works and it's awesome. So just know that you can now type on these, which are great. So how we create sequences? Working with Cine cameras. Let's go and work slightly with Cine cameras because I don't want Erica to kill me. So let's touch slightly on them and some details panels. Okay, so cameras in UE5 will emulate what a real camera does, right? So we have film controls, we do have film back, lens, focus, and tracking. I'm going to show you 2 of these and then Erica will show you 20 more probably. Let's play with the camera that we already have here in our sequence. We're going to look through the camera to start playing with some of the values. Once we add a camera, Unreal already populates and gives us some of the most used settings. So focal length, which will give us obviously the focal length on our camera. The higher the focal length, the more flat our view is going to get. And the lower, the more 3D or fisheye we'll get, right? This obviously, if you know cameras, if you know the focal lengths, there we go, of cameras, you will know how to work with this. Maybe a 50, maybe you want 100 for this particular shot. And then you can see how we start getting some blur here because we obviously have to start playing around with our focus distance. But this will be a flatter view of our scene. See how it starts looking like a miniature, right? This is great for miniatures. It starts looking more geometric, right? More flat, and that's great. If I want more, a great setup for a character would be having, for example, this kind of thing, because it's bringing the background super forward, right? So we could be taking a look at our character here, and let's say this shot here looks very gamey, very 3D, right? So we could jump to a 50 And at that point, we're looking, this is looking slightly better. Let's jump to an 80. And this is already looking a little bit more cinematic. Now we are facing a problem here, right? What we can do here with the problem we're facing, which is obviously focus, is we could try and play with the focus here and go nuts, or we could do something that Unreal gives us, which is absolutely great and amazing. We're going to click on our camera here, and we're going to slide into the details panel of our camera. And we're going to look for focus settings, and we're going to turn on the debug focus plane. We can change the color if we want, but we're going to leave it by default. And nothing happened. And you're going to go, well, Franco, what happened? And I'm going to go, well, it's so far away that nothing happened. We cannot even see it. So we need to bring it over. Manual focus distance, we're on frame 0. We're going to pick the eyedropper and go, okay, let's pick, I'm going to pick this so you can actually see the plane. And that's Unreal's debug focus plane. Obviously, it will not render, but it will let us know where the focus point is here in Unreal, right? And now that we have it, we can either play around with the values, always try and aim for the center mass of our objects, unless we're trying to get like the tip of the nose or half of the face or something like that, right? Not the case. And then I can turn it off. So now I have that cinematic shot that I was looking at. I modified my focal length, turned it from 35 into an 80, and I went for a manual focus distance adjustment. I can also play a little bit with the film back settings with sensor width and height. So we could go for modifications like this. We can unlock the aspect ratio. I believe there's a way of unlocking the aspect ratio. Yeah, there we go. The aspect ratio will follow what we're doing here in our sensor. And here we can start generating this black bands that look cinematic. We can go and use the ones that Unreal already has by default, right? And these are all great. Same thing with the lenses. Again, this I don't want to delve too deep into this because we do have Erica and his class and her class, so she'll do better than me on this one. So let's go back to default values, and we've looked at working with cameras here in Unreal. So film back, lens, focus, and tracking. So let's go slightly over tracking. We're going to go outside of the camera to show tracking, eject, and we're going to touch slightly on tracking, very slightly. So look at tracking settings. The one I'm going to show you, the look at tracking. It will quite literally have an actor to track, which will pick Manny, and there's going to be a problem that everybody's going to have, and everybody's going to ask what's happening. As you can see, the camera now will follow Manny, no matter where Manny is. If you can, let's lock the camera. And if we move Manny, we're following him. But you're going to say right away, hey, Franco, we're not following Manny. We're following. Oops. Well, Google is telling me, hey, you called me. No, I did not. Go away. So you're going to tell me, hey, Franco, that's not tracking Manny. Well, it is. The thing with the look at tracking on our cameras that we enable here and that we chose our actor is that it will track the pivot point of whatever actor we are tracking. And in this case, Manny has his pivot point on the feet because that's exactly how it should be, right? Characters should have their pivot on the feet. How do we fix this? Very quick and dirty fix. We can add something called an empty here in Unreal, which is, I believe, let's do this and let's search and let's learn where is our empty. Oh, it's called an actor. It's not an empty. Yeah, I believe it's the actor, right? Yes, there we go. So if we unlock and we take a look at what the actor is quite literally an empty. So what I'm going to do is be very sneaky. Go find where Mr. Manny is. I'm going to bring him out, actually. And I'm going to parent this actor to Manny. We're going to go with the head. It doesn't really matter where we parent him because we can then modify at will. But since I did parenting, I did the parenting to the head, I can now zero out rotation and location. And that will actually now make it so my actor, my empty, is on the bone of the head. At this point, I could even be more precise and say, no, I really wanted to track the face. So what I do now is in my camera and in my details panel, instead of tracking Manny, I'm going to track my actor, which I should be able to track from here. Actor 3. If I now look through my camera, effectively, I am tracking the face. And this is a sneaky way of having on a character, which will not have the pivot where we wanted to track our camera, have a different track, right? So if I now were to go find my empty and actually move it, I am moving the tracking of the camera. And here we go. We can track the center, his arm and chest like. And there we go. And again, if I were to animate this camera, let's animate the camera. Let's pilot the camera and let's animate it. This camera is cam class 1. Switch to unlocking and then going back in. If I were to now move, the camera is kind of trying to fight me a little bit. And there we go. It will always be looking, even if I go here, once I juggle a little bit on sequencer, it will go back to looking at my character or my, in this case, my empty, right? And my focus is getting broken. We can play a little bit with that too. So first and foremost, let's fix it right here. So we're setting a keyframe. And then let's say we can set a keyframe again. And there we go. Focus also has a tracking. I will no longer touch on Erica's class. So I will shy out of this so I don't get killed behind the scenes, but she will go over focus tracking, right? Because Unreal obviously does have that too. So let's jump back into some of the settings. We talked about this slightly, and this covers just mentions, because again, full class of cinematics. On cinematics, not on cinematics, on actual cameras. Cinematics is pretty much, this is called fellowship animation, should be called fellowship sequencer, which will be opening in every single class. So film back, which was the aspect ratio, our lens settings for f-stop and focal length, focus settings, manual focus distance, the debug focus plane, which is awesome, and the tracking settings for the look at tracking, right? So let's go into the tail end of our class today, which is hands-on multi-camera demo, which is where we will apply everything we've been looking at today and more. So let's jump back into Unreal. And is there a way to track only location and not rotation? What do you mean with that? Because as of right now, we are... You mean so the camera does not rotate? It would be a very hard way of tracking, I believe. I'm not sure I follow. Second question says, this is a different than enabling the camera to look at, right? So this is essentially look at. What I'm enabling in the camera is the look at tracking. We're enabling the look at tracking, right? We're enabling look at tracking. And we do have the tracking interpolation speed because we can animate which actor the camera is tracking. So we can blend between them, handle with care when you're doing animation on the actors the camera is tracking, because sometimes it goes slightly nuts when you switch between one and the other. So let's actually go over the multi-camera demo. So this sequence, we're going to clean it up, and we're going to create a multi-camera setup, which is the first workflow that we tend to work with once we start working with Unreal. We're gonna go back to, I think it's 20 for our default. Nope. Let's leave it on 35. We're going to create a camera right away. So we're going to be fine. So what we're going to do here today is play around a little bit with Unreal and Sequencer. And we're going to create 5 different shots. We're going to use 5 different cameras. And we're going to slightly animate one of them, some of them, not one of them. And we're going to have everything working on a single sequence. We're not going to do nested sequences, which is what we will cover on Friday on advanced workflows. Okay, so I'm going to show you 2 ways of creating cameras. One is by using the Place Actors button here, going into Cinematics and dragging in a Cine Camera Actor. 3 ways of creating cameras. The third one is going to be the coolest. If I drag this camera in, populates the world, it becomes possessable. Straight away, cam, shot, 01, class. And it becomes possessable. It's in the world. I can actually pilot the camera by right-clicking on it and going to pilot. And let's put our first shot all the way up here doing a bird's eye view of my environment. So now we need to bring this camera into Sequencer. So I'm going to right click here, Actor to Sequencer, add camera shot 01 class. Now Unreal automatically goes, oh, you brought in a camera. This has to need a camera cuts track. And in this case, the engine is correct. In this case, not always. In this case, the engine is correct. And it created a camera cuts track for us. Now, the problem with this camera cuts track is that it is too long. So we have several things we can do to shorten it. For now, let's create a very short animation. And let's say this will run for 45 frames. So we're going to stop here. And at this point, I'm going to right click on my camera cuts track. I'm going to go to edit and I'm going to split section. And this will create a second camera cut track that is now separated from the original, which lets me now, this is because the snapping is not, there we go, which lets me now have 2 different camera cuts and 2 different cameras assigned to each one of them. My camera right now is assigned to both of them, which is fine, but I know that my second one starts at frame 45. So I'm going to do a slight animation here. I'm going to jump to the last frame and we're going to push in very, very slightly. There we go. Simple, very simple animation. Nothing too fancy. And there we go. We already have 1 animation. Now we need, like I said, we're going to create, we're going to do 3 cameras rather than 5. So we're going to do another split section here at frame 100. Split section. But we need to create a second camera. Now I told you I was going to show you 3 ways of creating cameras. The third way, we saw it already, which was create a new camera and set the current camera shot. I don't know what's going to happen if I do it right now. Nothing. Okay, great. There are several camera cuts here. So Unreal realized that and it didn't populate any of these with my new camera, which is great. We want to call this com shot 02 class. And this will bring in my second camera. This one is spawnable. So remember that. How do we tell this second camera cut track that that camera is the one it should be using? We can right click on it and change camera is up here. So we could go for that. Or properties all the way up, camera binding ID, and then we search for the camera we have. Now, the way Unreal creates that camera is from the POV. So it created the camera wherever we were sitting at. That's why this camera right now looks the same. But what I'm going to do, since I am piloting it, is go in and take a look at our character from up here. Let's say I want to do a shot like this, very close to the wall, looking at our character. So now my second camera is okay. First camera, if I look through my cuts, not my camera, this icon will let me look through whatever I'm clicking at, in this case, camera 2, camera 1, or my cuts. And as you can see, we're jumping now. We already have a second camera. And now we have a third, and we're going to create the third camera in the third way I told you guys that I was going to show, which is probably one of the better ones, which is I can sit on anywhere on my perspective point, my perspective viewport with my perspective camera, and let's sit up here, and I can go here to my, which is called the hamburger icon, or some of us call it the hamburger icon or menu, and go find the button that says create camera here. Now, ton of options, always go for Cine Camera Actor, okay? Always, that's non-negotiable, Cine Camera Actor. And as you can see, it created for us Cine Camera 36. We're going to right click here in Sequencer, Actor to Sequencer, bring it in, and call it Cam Shot 03 class. And we're going to assign it because it's not assigned, even though it looks like it is. Look at it here. It is because I'm locked to it. But if I lock to the shots, I am still on camera 2, on camera 1 rather. So right click and right click and camera shot 3 class. And there you have it. We have now created 3 shots on what it's called a multi-camera demo, right? We have more than one camera, but it is a single sequencer. It is a single camera cuts. So we do not have any nesting here, which is what we will do on Friday with advanced workflows, where we'll start working as actual production does with nested sequences, which is the way everybody works, right? Because this one right here would be great for previs or for a storyboard, but it won't be necessarily great for animating on each of these shots. Because if I were to animate on each of these shots, I'm going to have 3 characters here. Maybe the character is holding a prop, so I'm going to have 3 props. So then this is going to start becoming a whole wrangle of assets and actors flying around my sequence, and I don't have the capabilities of going in and modifying on the fly the shots themselves, etc., etc. So this is how we set up our shots. I'm going to then again slightly animate some of these cameras. So we're gonna go for a push in on this one. So we're gonna go frame 1, and then we're gonna go to the last frame on this shot, and we're going to, by piloting the camera, we're going to push in into him, something like that. Again, we're doing very, very slight animation. This is way too fast. So what I'm going to do, this is another thing I can do. Since that I don't care that the cut is going to cut my camera after, what I'm doing is just making it slower. Obviously, we're not going to get the same final position, but I'm making a very, very different look and feel now on this shot, right? And then we're switching. I'm not switching because I'm not on my cuts. Now I'm switching. And then we snap to him, right? So, and then in this case, I'm going to go to the first frame, and I'm going to go to my last camera, and I'm going to go, okay, let's key transform here, and let's command the camera or pilot the camera. And we're going to be looking at his side here. And then on the last frame of the shot, let's do something like this. And then we have this effect going. Too fast. So I'm going to extend it. That looks better. And we can, at this point, since I extended it and I really want to reach that final keyframe, now I'm moving my end line. And there's a couple of ways I can do this. I can click on this keyframe and it will send me to the keyframe. And I can right click on the playhead and set end time. That's probably the most precise way of doing it. So that's the one I would recommend. But then remember, I need to extend this cut. Otherwise, if I switch to it, I'm going to snap out of it. So always remember that I need to be very mindful of my camera cut being fully covering my entire in and out, right? So at this point, we have a 3-camera, multi-camera setup. This is looking great. And what we're going to do is also work a little bit with our focus. We're going to bring the focus closer. And we're going to start with the focus in here. And we're going to end up with him in full focus. So we're going to bring focus right there. There we go. And then we get this effect here. So as you can see in Sequencer, we can animate a lot of things. It's not just moving things, it's just changing values. What we're doing really is changing values, right? So we at this point generated a simple multi-camera demo with 3 different shots with some animation on some of the cameras. On the third camera, we even went further and we animated our focus. And then we have this slide movement here on the last one. And we're going to start playing a little bit more with what can we animate here in Sequencer. You're going to be seeing character animation throughout the following classes. But I'm going to show you, I want to show you a little bit more of what you can do here in Sequencer and what else can you animate. By the way, if you see gizmos flying around, if we hit the G key, that will turn them on and off. So if we want a more cinematic look, we can turn them off by clicking on viewport first, and we can turn them on and off. So let's stay on this last shot, which actually looks pretty cool. And let's do some fun things with animation. Let's animate things that one would not think you can animate from the get-go here in a 3D software. So I'm going to bring him into Sequencer. He's going to instantly populate with control rig. Everything's going to become weird. We're going to get rid of control rig because this is not control rig class. The one thing I want to do is run an animation on him. Again, you're going to have explanations on all of this, but just really quickly, and stepping on the toes of some of my coworkers, animations, we create an animation track by adding plus track animation. And any and all animations that are bound to this skeleton will populate this submenu here. I just wanted to do this to change him from being like that to an idle. And I will then run the idle throughout the entirety of my 3 shots. So now he looks like at least he's not T-posing, right? And look at that. Way more intimidating. So what I wanted to show you is some things that we don't necessarily think that we can animate, but that we can, because Unreal is cool as that. I'm going to get rid of the other animation. Oops, I got rid of the one I shouldn't have. I'm going to get rid of this one. There we go. And we're going to grab Manny, and we're going to start diving a little bit deeper on what Manny is here in Unreal, right? He is a skeletal mesh. We know that. We know that he also has materials assigned to him. So what I want to do is, like I said in one of my previous slides, we can animate materials. So let's actually do that. It's not that straightforward. We can go to plus track. And what we first and foremost need to do is graph the skeletal mesh component, because this here is the actor that contains the skeletal mesh asset. So we first go and hunt him down. And on this one, we can go to plus track. And as you can see, we have a ton more options here. What I want to do here, because I want to play around with his materials, if I didn't crash Unreal, which I think I did. Are we good on video? We are. And you can still hear me? You can. We can go, it came back. We can go to element 0 or element 1 parameters, and we can start animating those. Let's take a chance here and say element 1. And let's take another chance here and see what parameters element 1 is going to give us. Cool. Very good. Good. I like this. This is letting me animate any exposed to cinematics parameter that the material has created for the actual instance. I'm going to go for color layer 0. And let's see what happens if we animate color layer 0. Now, this is something that I got. I think this is a bug, and I found it the other way. Because as you can see, this is a color here. Clearly, if I start playing around with it, I am going to get a different effect. And you can see there in the background how the color is. Oh, I'm touching the alpha. I wanted to go for red. Let's go more red. All right, perfect. And let's go a little higher on these. Let's go for red one. Let's change it to red. And let's go 0 and 0. Okay. And we cannot necessarily tell. Let's go out and let's take a look, closer look. Well, yeah, you can see that it is changing. Let's actually go for the other parameter, layer 1 color, because I think that's the one we want to change the most. And let's go for red on layer 1. We'll do red. We'll do 0 here. And we'll do 0 here. Okay. So that might not, I think it's the, oh, this is what happens when you don't necessarily, and we lower this so it's not burning our corneas. Which one is it? Okay, tell you what. Logo, not great idea. Let's go with something else. Let's see if metallic paint means that we can, hey, look at that. So what I wanted to show you is that we can actually start animating things that we don't necessarily expect that we can animate, right? So we now turn his armor into a more opaque white armor. Well, not opaque, but on a more white rather than metallic gray armor, right? And you can then start having fun with this, because what we can do, because we have the power of the curve editor, is, okay, I told Unreal to do this switch. How would you animate back and forth between this? Well, I could copy paste. I'm doing this very fast, right? I could copy paste. Yeah, we got the effect. Or I could use Unreal's capabilities, and I'm gonna, again, step on the toes of my constructors because I know they will love that. I can go into my curve editor, find the curves that I'm playing with. And what I would need to do at this point is actually create a back and forth loopable. Let's say this is loopable. Let's fix this a little bit. And what I can do with this is use one of the buttons that I did not show, but I will show now, which is a post-infinity cycle. I can tell Unreal to cycle post-infinity, which means quite literally that this, with only 3 keyframes, will now cycle post-infinity. I could even go here and actually shorten the way these keyframes are behaving. And since it's set up to a post-infinity cycle, it will now obey that, and it will change that post-infinity cycle moving forward. So yes, you can animate a light intensity doing this. This is a loop, so this is not how you animate a flicker, but it is how you could animate a siren, for example. If you want the intensity to go up and down, if you want to change the color of the light, right? So this is how you would do a different thing in Unreal, right? How you would animate something that's not what we tend to use normally. I think this has to be 50, right? Yeah, there we go. Okay, we're back to normal. So this is how you animate some other things. So some of the questions that are popping up, emissive hue, yeah, that would have been another of the parameters. So can you animate that parameter based on an audio track? Yes, you can. That goes down into a more deeper explanation. Has to do with DMX controls and something that I'm not super related, super close to. I've never used them before, but yes, you can absolutely animate a parameter based on an audio track. I have seen that done before, and it can be 100% done. And then all the other questions have been answered because my TAs are awesome. And yeah, that's pretty much sums up what we were going to look at today in class. I know it was a lot, and we're finishing up 7 minutes slightly early. These are some of the hotkeys here in Unreal. So we have S to set all the keyframes on all transformations. Now, careful with S, because as it says right there, S will create a keyframe on all transformations, which means all of them, absolutely all of them, right? So be mindful and be wary of that, because it does have a impact on how many keyframes you have running on your sequence. You may just want to do location, so you will use this, the topmost, to create a keyframe, and it will keyframe only location. Or you may only want to keyframe X, then you can use here the one in between the lines in X, in between the arrows. The arrows will jump between keys. Something that populated here and that I wanted to show is that these are new, and you can move around in between keyframes with these, which are great. And then we also have something called the layer bars, which are these on top here. Layer bars belong to each of the components and behave as a hierarchy. So if I move them, if I move the highest hierarchy, I'm going to move everything below, but I can move something below without moving the highest hierarchy. The highest hierarchy obviously gets extended, as you can see, because it understands, oh, okay, it keeps going. But layer bars are really, really powerful. This is not a layer bar. This is the actual track. And then animation, when you see animation, you're going to touch more on layer bars. So we have a ton of questions here. Let's take a look at them. Backtracking to spawning. What are the load and memory implications of not using them? Well, obviously having too many actors spawning at the same time may create a hiccup on your on the flow of your either animation or of your gameplay. So be wary of that. Obviously, not using spawnables means that we are disappearing things from the engine, things that the engine will not take in consideration until the sequencer is open. So it's lighter than having objects and not having them visibility on. It's easier to have them on spawnables because it's also not being taken into consideration in your outliners. Can you please show how you added the material track, please, as well as the infinite? Thanks. We can absolutely go for that one, and in 5 minutes, and then we'll go over the break and come back to infinite more questions, but live without the webinar, which will be easier, right? So let's show how I added the material track once again. I knew this was going to be tricky, but let's show how I added the material track here. I first and foremost, when I brought in, let's bring in an actual static mesh rather than our character, which makes it a lot easier, right? So right click, actor to sequencer, SM wall. And in the wall already, I can go to track and find my static mesh component. Again, my actor contains a static mesh component. If I go and look at the details panel here of my actor, it's going to tell me that it contains a static mesh component. This is the instance that is containing a static mesh component. And that's why I need to do this additional step here in Unreal. So static mesh component. And then on the static mesh, now, yes, it is now letting me choose the actual material. And in material parameters, I'm going to choose element 0, 1, or 2 because it relates to these here. If you bring materials from an outside source, a DCC, those materials will have the names that you assign to them, right? These materials, the elements, the slots, these are the material slots as we call them in Maya or in Blender. They don't have their slots name. They only have the material name, right? We're going to bring in element 0 and see what happens. Once we brought in element 0, we now have to cross our fingers and think, okay, what's the parameter? What are the parameters that are being exposed in element 0? And we thankfully have one that's going to be pretty obvious, which is hue color. So we can now play with hue color and change it around, as you can see. And then I can go in here and say, let's go like that. And then I can go in here and say, let's go like that, right? So I'm going to now send these. Sadly, the layer bars do not seem to be working with this specific one, because if I do this, oh, okay, fair enough. This is the capability of the layer bars. This is why they are so cool, right? They let us squish and stretch the time in between our interpolations. So I'm going to do that for there, and then I'm going to extend the shot, not the shot, the track itself. So I have this now, and on the same question was how to do the repeating. So I am now going to, with the material element selected, or at least the actor selected, go and open my curve editor. And I have these values here, which are all my RGB values of the hue color, right? RGB. I'm going to go hue color, select all of them, and go to post infinity cycle. Now, this one, since I didn't go back to the original color, is going to do a loop. It's absolutely going to do it, but it's going to snap into it, right? So we're going to get this effect, which might not necessarily be what we want. So at that point, we would need to do a loop on the color, right? We would need to be smart the way we're creating this loop. So we're going to do it. And we're going to say, okay, that's going to be the starting and ending color. But then here in the middle, we're going to go with a red. And now we do have this effect. And there we go. And that's how you create a change of colors, how you populate with a parameter, and how you do a little bit of a loop. So we have a couple more questions, but I do really want to take the 10-minute break so you can all have your brains not melt. And then we can come back to an actual live when you can speak up and use the mic, and we'll go over all the fun stuff that you guys are asking.